With the latest on the corporate front, all the market trends, expert opinion, and sound business advice. It is your unique window into the business world, direct from the heart of China.
Hello and welcome to Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Coming up, we will have half an hour of business news and analysis. On today's show, China's economy shows sustained recovery and improvement in the first quarter, with GDP growth hitting 5.3%. We will hear about the latest consumption trends from the China International Consumer Products Expo in Hainan. And the IMF has lifted its global economic outlook for this year to 3.2%. What are the challenges and opportunities? And now let's begin with our top story. The Chinese economy has performed well in the first quarter of this year. The gross domestic product grew by 5.3% in the first 3 months over the same period last year, thanks to strong growth in high-end manufacturing. And data also shows that increased retail sales, investment growth, and increasing imports and exports all indicate the steady recovery of the country's economy. And following visits to China in March by several foreign CEOs, China entered a week of international trade exhibitions. The events highlight the potential of China's dynamic consumer market and the country's commitment to opening up. The fourth China International Consumer Product Expo was recently held in South China's Hainan province. Our correspondent Li Yunqi covered the event. Hi Yunqi, so what was your experience at the Hainan Expo?
Well, this year's Expo is definitely larger than before because I had the chance to visit the Hainan Expo 2 years ago, and the floor space for this year's Hainan Expo has expanded from 100,000 square meters to 128,000 square meters. And the difference is that they are opening more locations to showcase more consumption trends from various industries. And for this year, there's also more international representation, right? And 2 years ago, it was France that was the guest of honor country for the 2022 Hainan Expo. This year, this honor has shifted to Ireland with 29 Irish companies and organizations showcasing Irish liquor, food, dairy, tech, and tourist companies. But still, French companies or the French Hall still occupies quite a large floor space at the Hainan Expo. And apart from these two countries, there are actually 4 more countries that have set up their national hall for the first time. UK, Mongolia, Malaysia, Russia. And these 4 countries, they have, for the first time, set up their national booth at the Hainan Expo. So to bring all the companies from these countries together to one booth. And that doesn't mean there are no representation from other countries yet. So there are companies from other countries that have their own booth here at the Hainan Expo. But these 4 countries, along with Ireland and France, they actually have their own national booth, to bring all the companies from those countries together.
So what are your main takeaways regarding the spending power of the Chinese market?
Right. There are many consumer habits, consumer consumption trends emerging in the recent years. And the Hainan Expo is trying to showcase these consumption trends like exchanging old products for new ones. So it's kind of like a green consumption habit. And also people trying to build smart homes, cultural, to go to tourism with more cultural features, and also trying to exercise more. And that brings up the sports industry. And there's one very interesting event from this Hainan Expo. There was an EV testing drive tour around this island. So along this highway, that's 988 kilometers, that's around Hainan Island to test these electric cars. And the one that I'm personally focused on for my reporting is this healthy trend. So there are like companies from various industries making headphones, making headsets, and also focused on sleeping technology. And food and beverage companies, they are all catering to this growing demand from consumers that are trying to live a healthier lifestyle. And you can see there are many new products released from all kinds of industries to cater to this healthier consumption trend.
Thank you, Yunqi. And for more on this and China's economic outlook, join us on the line now are Dr. Zhou Mi, Senior Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and also Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University. And so, Yan, first of all, China's gross domestic product grew by 5.3% in the first quarter, beating expectations. So what are the main factors for it, do you think?
Right. So this is definitely a very positive and robust start of this year. And I think, what really helps to contribute to this from the supply side has to do the industrial output growth, which has gone up by 6.1%. And when you look at the high-tech manufacturing, that achieved even faster growth at 7.5% year on year. So this manufacturing activities is really helping to drive the economic growth. And with that, we also see the fixed asset investments has gone up by 4.5%. So, as we know, the real estate sector is continuing having the downturn. The real estate sector investment fell by 9.5%. But, the infrastructure investment and also manufacturing investment have more than offset the decline in the real estate investment. So I think this is very positive. When we look at the private investment, it's also gone up by 0.5%. And outside of the real estate sector, private investment is actually up by 7.7%. So all these means is that, the business investment is picking up. Businesses are expanding. So this is a good sign. And then from the consumer side, the retail sales have been, growing by 4.6% for the goods and 10% for the retail services. So that provide a very strong demand for the economy. We also seeing, net contribution from China's net exports. So all of these means that, not only the supply side is growing, but it's also improving in terms of its structure, and the demand is remains to be strong, but definitely there's still way to boost the demand side even more.
And so, Dr. Zhou, actually positive signs, a lot of, Yan mentioned. And how do you view the internal and external environments for China's economy this year?
Yes, we know that for China's economy, the market is picking up their confidence, and they are trying to put more strengthen the environment and trying to make the connections better. So we discuss about of the economic performance, different areas. From the investment, from the consumptions, they are better connected. This kind of circles or circulations is improved in the past the quarter. And the confidence are picking up, and the government is trying to change and reduce the barriers in this regarded markets. So for the environment, I believe that it is still very complicated. If we are looking at some of the policies of other governments, they are still sending some signals, like from United States, they are picking some of the areas to put some 301 investigation just a few days ago. So we are still see a lot of uncertainty about the geopolitical things, about the global supply chains. So we are still, in the phase to trying to strengthen the connections between China's domestic market and the foreign market. It is very important for us to understand the complicated situation and trying to put more of our strengths on the more important areas.
And let's talk about consumption, Yan. So the retail sales of consumer goods rose by 4.7%. So how do you view the domestic demand and private consumption for this year?
Right. So I think the consumer sentiment is gradually improving. Not only do we see, the retail sales of goods have gone up, as we just mentioned, but I think the retail sales of services registered even higher growth, as I mentioned earlier, 10% year on year. So I think that is a very healthy growth from the demand side. The other thing that we were looking at is also households started to also gradually run down on their deposits, on their household savings. There's still 60 trillion yuan of deposits in the banks by the Chinese households. Most of this was built up during the COVID years, and also, right after COVID, this kind of precautionary saving is still driving up the household deposits at the banks. But we start to see the signs that the households start to decelerate their savings growth. So I think that also shows that households that now have more confidence to spend instead of continue to save more out of their disposable income. The other thing I think it's important to note is the disposable income growth, which actually, is higher than the GDP growth rate. So I think with the healthy growth in the household income, and then also with the strengthened household, the consumer confidence, I think we're likely to see the kind of consumption growth will continue on. So when we look at the domestic demand, for example, investment demand and also consumption demand have contributed to, 85.5% of the growth rate of the first quarter. And net exports contributed, to 14.5% of the growth. So in other words, I think we see strong growth in domestic demand, but also quite positive increase in the external demand. So I think, for the demand side, that would be wonderful to continue on with the momentum, because, as we know, China's industrial capacity really accelerated a lot. Right now, the manufacturing sector investment, as I mentioned earlier, has gone up by 9.9%. So to keep up with the high manufacturing capacity expansion, we would need to have high growth of consumer demand to keep that excess capacity out and to keep that supply and demand more in balance.
So Dr. Zhou, so how do you think China's incentive policies, especially those aimed at boosting consumption, have unfolded and impact the market dynamism?
Yeah, actually, in the past several years, consumption is always one of the topics that Chinese government put more emphasis on improve. So for nowadays, we see that Chinese government is trying to use some of the update plans to trying to help the consumers to improve their quality of the consumption. I think this kind of policies is not only trying to give some information to the consumers, but also provide so many opportunities to the related enterprises who are producing those consumption products. So in this several months, we see that many of the enterprises is trying to provide better quality products, like for improve their abilities to do with the environment protection and also reducing the energy consumption. It is really a very important change for the people to think about what can we do to not only just to consume the products we used to have, but trying to try some new things, and that is definitely one of the possibilities. Well, in this regard, I would say that there are more space that enterprises are trying to explore, like to improve the digital aspects or some of the virtues of the products and trying to make them interconnected. So it's a very wise area, and I mean that's so many opportunities for different stakeholders to explore.
And Dr. Zhou, so China's total imports and exports in the first quarter exceeded 10 trillion yuan, and that was an increase of 5% over the last year. So how do you explain it, especially under the background that the U.S. and some other Western countries keep talking about the so-called de-risking or diversification?
Yeah, we know that the China Import-Export Fair is one of the most important flag in China for the different parties to observe the trend of the import and export. If you came here in Guangdong, you can find that it's occupied. So many people from different countries, they are trying to find opportunities. I think that is because they believe that China's trade can provide with so many opportunities and benefits. I think that it is not only about the fair itself. It's about how can they trying to contribute to this supply chains by innovative ways. So, the trade is one of the representative about the different countries' abilities and advantages. I mean that for the first quarter, China's import and export has grown very strong. It's much more, than we expected, especially for the import. If you are looking at the data about the import is a little bit stronger than the past several quarters. I think that is one of the result that China's consumption and domestic markets are providing many opportunities. Well, for the export, it is also true that China is providing so many other countries with different kind of things. So the world is better connected with China by the supply chains, and that is definitely one of the reasons that why we see the data.
And so how do you see China's role in the global value chains or supply chains right now?
Right. So I think China plays a very vital role in the global supply chain, especially when we think about green energies, green products, green technologies. China definitely plays a very important role. When it comes to, for example, manufacturing of solar panels, China accounts for over 88% of the global supply of the solar panels. Wind turbines, that's 60%, and China's new threes in the exports. That those include the lithium batteries, the EVs, and also the solar panels. Are really driving the export growth. And so all of these are very important for the rest of the world to accelerate their green transition. So in that sense, I think China is really very important and playing an indispensable role in the global supply chain. Now, I know that with the Western's de-risking strategies, there's some concern about how China may be excluded or even sort of marginalized in some of the supply chain of some of the critical industrial products. But at the same time, I think, for one, China is just too important to be left out. So with all these de-risking strategies, what happened is it will simply elongate that supply chain and also make the supply chain more complicated and more opaque because some countries will simply import China's products and then re-export out, or China would have to set up businesses in various countries to avoid the kinds of tariffs and restrictions of China's exports. So that would just make things more complicated and reduce efficiency and also resiliency of the global supply chain. So I think that it's really, a sort of double whammy for these countries that implement these kind of strategies. The other thing I think is important is when we look at the exports, what has been really growing, for China is for example, BRI countries, the Belt Road Initiative countries' trade has gone up by 5.5% year on year this quarter, and now they're accounting for 47.4% of the total trade. So what that means is, again, if the Western market remains to be, in a way, sort of trying to be restrictive, China still foster other trade partners and have business and trade with them. Not to mention, when we look at the global transformation, so to speak, last year China's exports to the global South reached $1.6 trillion, which is more than the $1.4 trillion exports to the United States, EU, and Japan combined. So I think in a way, for one, China will continue to play a very important role in the global supply chain. And for two, China has been diversifying its trade partners. I think so that would help to really strengthen China's international trade competitiveness and also its trading sort of the prowess.
And so, Dr. Zhou, for China's economy this year, the policymakers have unveiled a series of, fiscal and monetary policy measures as the government tries to boost the economy. So how have they worked? And tell us more about that.
Yeah, I think that is still in the very first stage. If you are looking at some of the declaration from the NDRC that they are trying to consider about how can they put the treasury measures to support the development of the infrastructure of a lot of very special purpose plans. So they were trying to fulfill this before the end of this June. So it's still are in the first stage, and they have selected all the projects. If you're looking at the policies, I mean, the intentions of the government is trying to make the connections of the different terms better, to trying to make it in a good ways to improve the quality of the development. So many of the policies are not trying to strengthen the traditional sectors and trying to improve or increase the capacities, but actually they are trying to improve the higher quality development. So that is something to do with the innovative ways of development. As for the trade policies, I would still argue that there are so many practices that China is continue to fulfill our commitments to the international organization and different agreements, and trying to make a better facilitation about the trade and reach better free trade agreements with other partners, that is definitely helpful for the better confidence of the market.
Well, we're speaking with Dr. Zhou Mi, Senior Research Fellow with Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and also Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University. And after a short break, we'll take a look at IMF's global economic outlook of 3.2% for this year. Stay with us. You're listening to Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. The International Monetary Fund has lifted its global economic outlook for this year to 3.2%, and this is up 0.1 percentage point from its previous forecast in January. Their forecast for China's economic expansion remains unchanged at 4.6%. And meanwhile, the growth in the Eurozone was revised lower, with 0.8% likely in 2024 and 1.5% in the year 2025. So yeah, actually for global economic activity, the IMF expects the growth of 3.2% this year. So what do you think is the current situation of the world economy?
Right. So first of all, I think they haven't upgraded or updated China's growth forecast because by the time they released the World Economic Outlook, they didn't really incorporate China's fourth quarter growth number yet. So at the WEO release meeting, the chief economist actually mentioned that with China's first quarter, strong GDP growth, they might consider revising China's growth forecast. So I think that is one thing to keep in mind. And second, to the question about the current situation of the economy, I think for one, the IMF has used remarkable resilience to describe the current global economy, in the sense that, they have forecasted worse economic outcome for the year earlier, but because inflation has gradually declined and the geopolitical situation has been somewhat stabilized, and they're seeing very strong growth in the United States and China, and moderate growth in the emerging markets, in other emerging markets like European economies, and also some strong growth in some other emerging markets. I think they believe that the current global economy is going to do fine at the 3.2% growth rate. But to put this in perspective, for one, I think this is a much lower growth rate than the decades before the pandemic. So in other words, the global economy has not yet reestablished or returned to the pre-pandemic trajectory. And for two is, I think the growth has been really diverging. So some countries are doing well, like the United States, they forecasted 2.5% growth rate. But like you mentioned, the Europeans are struggling in some ways. We're also seeing some of the low-income countries are also struggling, that they're actually poorer than the pre-pandemic level. So we're seeing divergence, not to mention some of the potential risks that we could definitely talk more about.
So yeah, actually, what do you think are the challenges and potential risks to the global economy right now?
Right. So the IMF identified 4 major risks. One has to do with the fact that the inflation has not been completely defeated yet, in the words of the managing director of the IMF. So she cautioned for cautious and gradual approach when it comes to monetary policy. So then they're able to achieve sort of the last mile of that inflation fighting. The second risk for them is that fiscal deficit in many countries, including the United States. They have really openly criticized, which is very unprecedented, that the United States fiscal deficit could risk reflating the economy. But I think the U.S. is, it's not as much of a problem, given that, the fiscal deficit is in the U.S. dollar. But I think for a lot of developing countries, they're having a lot of deficits and debt, which they have to pay to external creditors. And that could really undermine their fiscal capacity at home. The third risk that they mentioned is the geopolitical tensions and also fragmentations. Especially, with the fragmentation of trade, that's going to lead to less efficient, less resilient, and less cooperative, global economy and global supply chain. And the last risk that they mentioned is, again, there's not enough action in terms of fighting climate change, especially when it comes to technological transfers and also climate financing. We're still not doing enough to really delay, trying to, keep the temperature from rising too much. So I think these are really, the 4 risks that they mentioned in their report.
And Dr. Zhou, so those are potential risks, but opportunities are also growing in areas like artificial intelligence and green energy. So how do you view China's green transition, and what does it mean for its own economy and the world economy?
Definitely, that China is providing a very big room for the development of the artificial intelligence and green transition. Well, in China, the market is reflecting very actively. We see that the production, industrial products, that many of these highly improved or highly increased products are in the green technology, green related products like the EVs and also some of the charging poles. And there are so many new products that are provided by the enterprises. And they are providing many opportunities, not only for China's investors, but also for the supply chains around the world. Well, the second, I would say the artificial intelligence is really reshaping the China's economy. I mean, in some of these cities, they are putting more strength to improve their digitalization of the traditional companies or traditional manufacturing. They are trying to connect the different services by the better infrastructure connections with the digital connections. So these are really a very good, potential for the development. As for the government, they are also trying to give more confidence to the market, like to use the free trade zones and the free trade port to help the innovation-based activities to be employed. So, I mean, that is really our good opportunities for China to develop our own domestic market. Well, on the other side, I would say that also provide many opportunities to the foreign or our trading partners. We are providing products, the services, and also solutions. So these kind of things are practice. They are also contribute to the situation that Ian have mentioned. There's short of finance support, short of the technology transfer. We are trying to cooperating with our developing partners and to benefit, their economies of the transferring using the different trade and investment methods.
Well, we're speaking with Dr. Zhou Mi, Senior Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of International Trade and Economic Cooperation, and also Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University. And that's all the time we have for this edition of Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening.